Hi everyone, my name is Matt Sasaki. I'm a marine biologist in the Marine Sciences Department down at the Avery Point campus, and I study what happens to animals when they get too hot. Now, it being midsummer, many of you are probably watching these videos in a comfortably air-conditioned room. I know I just turned off my AC unit and will definitely be turning it on again as soon as I'm done recording this video because we don't like to be too warm, right? High temperatures can be uncomfortable, really high temperatures can be dangerous, and so we go out of our way to regulate the temperatures of the spaces that we inhabit. Animals in the wild, though, don't have the option of turning on an AC unit when things get too hot, and so instead, they just have to cope with whatever high temperatures they're exposed to. Now, it's probably not surprising that my work on how temperature affects organisms is motivated in part by the effects of climate change. And we are living in an era of rapid global climate change where in many parts of the world, average temperatures are increasing at a really rapid rate. However, that's not the only part of climate change that we have to worry about. Right? In addition to that increase in average temperature, what we've seen is an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme heat events. And now this made headlines a couple weeks ago with the heat wave that hit the Pacific Northwest. Right? That event pushed temperatures well above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, producing some of the highest ever recorded temperatures for that region. And again, those high temperatures can be dangerous for both human life and other animal life in the area that's not used to being exposed to such high temperatures. And in fact, a scientist up there in that region recently estimated that about 1 billion individual marine organisms living along the coastline there died as a result of that single extreme event. Now, Connecticut is actually in one of the fastest warming regions in the US. And so it's no longer a question of if these extreme events will affect our state and our local communities, but a matter of when. And so what we need to be thinking about is how can we predict and plan for the effects of those extreme events. And some of those events might actually hit closer to home than you would expect. I'd like you to take a second to think about what summertime in Connecticut means to you. Right? So I didn't grow up here in the state. I grew up in landlocked Colorado. And so when I moved out here in the middle of summer, one of the first things that struck me was how much fresh seafood there is, especially down here near the coast where I live. And so it's really clear when you spend time in these communities that these commercial fisheries are really important for people in the state of Connecticut, either as a source of income, a source of food, or at some level a source of community identity and pride. There's another important type of fishery in the area, these so-called recreational fisheries, right? Fisheries that you use for fun or for relaxation. For example, I have really fond memories growing up of fishing during the summers with my dad. Those early experiences with recreational fisheries are one of the reasons why I wanted to be a marine biologist in the first place, and in general are an effective way to engage people in conservation, right? To help make them feel connected to the natural spaces around them. All of this hopefully illustrates that fisheries, both commercial and recreational, are important for the state of Connecticut and the quality of life for the people who live here. As such, we should be thinking about how extreme heat events might affect fisheries in particular here in the state of Connecticut. Now, both types of fisheries rely on the same thing, right? Both fisheries rely on healthy aquatic food webs. As a little bit of background, aquatic food webs look a lot like the terrestrial food webs you're familiar with, right? Grass uses sunlight to grow, zebra eat the grass, lions eat the zebra. In aquatic food webs, organisms called phytoplankton use sunlight to grow, zooplankton eat the phytoplankton, small fish eat the zooplankton, bigger fish eat the smaller fish, and then if you eat fish, you eat the bigger fish. The main difference is that the base of the aquatic food web is microscopic. Right? What we're seeing here is an example of what those organisms look like seen through a microscope. These pillow-shaped cells that you see here are diatoms. They're a type of phytoplankton. They use sunlight to grow, and then they're eaten by the grazers that you see jumping around in this video. And these animals are called copepods. They're some of the most important grazers in aquatic food webs. In general, they're small crustaceans. Most of what you're seeing here is about the third of the size of a grain of rice. But despite being so small, copepods are some of the most abundant animals on the entire planet. And because of this, they're a really important source of food for fish in both freshwater and marine fisheries. However, because they're so small, copepods could be particularly vulnerable to the effects of extreme heat events. And those effects on copepods would then ripple out through marine food webs, through aquatic food webs, to affect the fisheries that we rely on. Now, that brings me to the project that I'm proposing. Despite their abundance and their importance for aquatic food webs, we still have very little information on copepod thermal limits. So we don't know just how vulnerable they are to extreme events. For example, in the state of Connecticut, we have information for just 2 closely related species of copepods, which comes from my own dissertation work. I'd like to go out, collect copepods from habitats across the state, and put together an atlas of sorts of copepod thermal limits. This information would tell us about patterns in the vulnerability of copepods to extreme heat events. And in doing so, we'd learn something about patterns in the vulnerability of the fisheries that these copepods support. Now, while I've only measured thermal limits for those 2 species here in Connecticut, I've measured a lot of thermal limits for those 2 species. And so the methods are really well established. They're simple, they're straightforward, and they provide robust data on copepod thermal limits. It also means that I already have most of the equipment that I need to make those measurements. Instead, most of the funds that I'm requesting will go towards travel, so I can go out, collect, and run the experiments for copepods in even the most remote locations in the state. Much like how the effects of heat waves on copepods can ripple out through aquatic food webs, I'm hoping that the data that I collect on copepod thermal limits will ripple out across the state to help improve the quality of lives of people in a rapidly changing climate by helping us understand, predict, and then plan for the effects of extreme heat events on our state's fisheries. Thank you.